Zebulon Pike's two tragic mistakes. One of them is not going to Oklahoma. Zebulon Pike was a captain in the United States Army when he set off in 1806 for parts unknown west of the Mississippi River. Pike's father, Zebulon Pike Sr., had served in the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. Then Zebulon Pike Sr. stayed with the Army after the war. So Zebulon Pike Jr. was an Army brat of sorts, moving from post to post as he grew up. Apparently, he liked traveling. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson arranged for the Louisiana Purchase. When Jefferson wanted somebody to explore the 828,000 miles of land they just bought, Pike signed up for the job. But he made a tragic mistake that would end in near disaster. Of course, he didn't know that at the time, but he came prepared. In addition to the many men he brought with him, he included both an interpreter and a surgeon, because there weren't any emergency rooms back then. But I need to back up. President Jefferson had several expeditions planned, including the famous Lewis and Clark expedition. That group left St. Louis, went up the Missouri, and trekked across the Rocky Mountains. That was in 1803. 2 years later, Jefferson arranged for more expeditions, including the Exploring the Red River expedition. Captain Richard Sparks headed up that expedition, and their goal was to explore the Red River Valley. The Red River was the boundary between the land purchased by the United States and the land owned by Spain. Just 4 years earlier, Napoleon Bonaparte and Spanish governor Don Juan Manuel de Salcedo signed a secret treaty. It gave France the Louisiana Territory, and then Bonaparte sold the land to the United States. Many Spaniards were peeved, and they didn't like the Americans very much. So when Captain Richard Sparks reached the southern tip of Oklahoma on his exploration of the Red River, he was driven back by one Spanish captain. Captain Francisco Viana blocked him from going any further. I suspect guns were involved. Sparks abandoned the expedition, and Americans wouldn't explore the area for many years. But I'm talking about Zebulon Pike. Just 1 month after Captain Sparks and his team left, Zebulon Pike left with his many men, his interpreter, and his surgeon. They traveled through Missouri, and then they headed north through what is now Kansas. Then the group headed south toward the Arkansas River and stopped at what is now Great Bend in Kansas. The plains are a mighty big place, so Pike decided to split up the expedition. He sent Lieutenant James B. Wilkinson with 5 men down the Arkansas River to see what they could see. But Pike decided to keep going west. He decided he'd catch the Red River area on his way back. Big mistake. Although he did end up getting a Rocky Mountain named after him, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, Lieutenant Wilkinson and his men built 2 canoes. One was a cottonwood trunk that was hollowed out. But for the other one, they assembled poles together and then stretched hides over them. Cutting corners is never smart. That boat wasn't very seaworthy, and they only made it 1 day down the river before they had to abandon those 2 boats. They traveled on foot for a while and then eventually made 2 canoes by carving them out of logs. Then they traveled down the river, discovered Weber's Falls, and then reached the mouth of the Poteau River, which is the border leading into Oklahoma. They entered Oklahoma on December 31st, 1806. Meanwhile, Pike continued west until he reached the Rocky Mountains. One particular mountain intrigued him, and he called it Grand Peak. He was determined to climb that peak and see what he could see. So he took 3 men with him, and they started to ascend the mountain. Unfortunately, they weren't prepared, and they certainly weren't dressed for the occasion. Pike's Peak can get chilly in the summertime, and this was fall. It started snowing, and it kept snowing. Soon, the men were wading in the snow. Their feet got cold, as you can well imagine, so the men cut up their blankets to cover up their feet. Of course, then, they didn't have blankets. I can't imagine how they slept at night. They finally gave up and came back down the mountain. Pike wanted to go east, but the snow was too deep. Now they were in real danger. If everyone stayed where they were, they'd freeze to death. At the same time, the injured men weren't fit to travel. So Pike promised those injured men that he would come back for them. Then he took the men that weren't injured, and he took them south. They reached what Pike thought was the Red River. Pike knew that if they stayed out in the elements, they'd freeze come January. So they cut down trees, made logs, and built a stockade. Then Pike sent men back to get those injured men, and they stayed in the stockade, hoping to ride out the winter. But they'd made a tragic mistake. They weren't on the Red River. They were on the Rio Grande River, right in the middle of Spanish territory. Spanish soldiers came upon the stockade, and they were not pleased. They didn't like the idea of Americans building a stockade on their land. They arrested Pike and his men. Initially, they took them down to Santa Fe. Then they took them all the way down to Chihuahua, Mexico. While they didn't exactly treat them like prisoners, they wouldn't let them go either. It took months of negotiations before Pike and his men were released. They were gone for almost a year. Dude, you should have gone to Oklahoma. That was the first disaster Pike faced. Sadly, there would be another one. After discovering a high peak in the Rocky Mountains and getting it named for himself, Pike returned to military life. Things seemed to go well for him for a while, and he achieved the rank of brigadier general. He fought in the Battle of Tippecanoe and then went to fight in the War of 1812. That's when the second disaster struck. Pike happened to be near a stockpile of ammunition when it exploded. The explosion killed Pike, and he died at the age of 34. Thank you, my amazing friend, for watching Okie Lore. Click the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Ding the notification bell so you never miss another episode. And I'll see you in the next one.